Getting to the original intent of the author is difficult. Trying to get into the mind of the person who wrote it, or trying to get into the mind of the people who first heard it read to them, or who it was addressed to. You know, when you're studying ancient doctrines, or doctrines, or documents, or historical or religious writings, getting to the original intent of the author is difficult. Often we end up interpreting ancient documents written either decades or centuries ago, guided by our own present day experience. In other words, when you look at something that was written in the first century, we try to interpret it from the perspective of the 21st century. Follow what I'm saying? Now, you hear these arguments take place, especially in our modern times, when somebody is wanting to appoint a Supreme Court justice. If you remember, it's always a big fight, because there are some who are what's called original intent. In other words, they want to take a look at the historical document, like the United States Constitution, and interpret it in the eyes of those who wrote it. What were these authors trying to say? What was their original intent? But then you have, on the other side, you have some that say, well, let's take this document and let's reinterpret it in light of the 21st century. So you hear this battle going on. I think it's important to get as close as you can to understanding the culture and the customs and the mindset and the worldview of those who were the recipients of these letters or documents, and also those who were the authors. So what we want to attempt to do, especially when you're studying the New Testament and the Gospels, you want to get to the original intent. What were the authors saying, and what did the people hear when these letters were written to them? And when you look at like 1st, 2nd Corinthians and the epistles of Paul, you have to realize that these were letters that were written to the church. They weren't so much books. I mean, when we look at them, we call them books of the Bible now. But these were letters that the authors were writing to these Christians in these locations, in these cities. Some say it's an impossible task to get to the original intent. I think what we should at least try to get into the mind of those who wrote it and those who heard it. One of the examples we can use is, for instance, in the Gospels and also in the book of Acts, you see a lot of what is considered supernatural phenomena, okay? Jesus walking on water, Jesus healing the sick, Jesus raising the dead. You see that type of stuff in the Gospels, and you see it continued in the book of Acts. But then when you get into the modern 21st century church, you don't really see much of that. You don't really expect much of that. And you say, well, how come we don't see much of that anymore? How come we don't expect much of that anymore? Well, a lot of it has to do with our culture and our worldview. In the Western civilization, we have grown up with what's called a rationalistic, materialistic worldview. In other words, the only things we understand are the things that our brains can comprehend, okay? Or the only thing that we can really know is real is what we can touch and feel. So therefore, when you try to interpret the Bible from a Western civilization worldview of rationalism and materialism, the miracles in the Bible seem something that happened way back then. And we really don't understand them today. So a lot of times what we do is we dismiss them because it's impossible. I mean, have you ever seen anybody walk on water? Have you ever seen the dead raised? Have you ever seen leprosy cured? Or any other type of... You see, so one of the problems is we just don't understand these things. But in the first century, people did, because they were very open to the miraculous. Even the ancients believed, the pagans believed that their gods interacted with them on a daily basis. So ancient people expected supernatural events to take place. It was just part of their worldview. In the 21st century, it's more, we look at it as more highly unlikely. Today I want to share with you a part of the cultural traditions of the ancient world during the life of Jesus. Now, when I talk about culture, what I mean are the values, the way people related to each other, how they viewed their world during the time they lived in. I think what I'm sharing is of critical importance to present-day believers today. So I want you to understand the gospel. And in order to really understand the gospel, we have to go back and look at the culture that it was written in. Because the culture it was written in will enrich our understanding of the gospel and the New Testament. A lot of information I'm sharing with you today, I will admit, comes from Dr. David De Silva. He's the guy that's our minister of traditional worship. David is a brilliant New Testament theologian. We here at this church, I don't know if you realize we have a world-class Bible scholar. David's I think I wouldn't embarrass him. I didn't say this in the last service. We have a world-class Bible scholar. This guy is brilliant. He is one of the top echelons of Bible scholars, I think, in the whole country. And I was reading some of his stuff in one of the books that he's published. And when I came across this section that I'm going to share with you today, I thought it's like the Spirit of God stopped me. It said, hold on. Read this stuff very carefully. Because this is very, very important word for the church today. And when I get through it, you'll understand what I'm saying. I mean, this stuff, David doesn't, he writes stuff and throws it out there for the world to read. But when I read this, it's like God just grabbed my mind and said, listen, you need to talk about this. So I'm going to share it with you today. It's stuff that's more than just interests me. I hope it interests you, and I hope it deepens your faith. And I hope it helps you understand the gospel a little bit better and what God has done for us. Most of us are familiar with the phrase, grace that is freely given. Yeah, how many of you have heard that? Grace is freely given. Some understand this to mean that God gives us his grace at no cost to us. It doesn't cost us anything. All we got to do is pray the prayer, come and kneel at the altar, and take Jesus into our heart. And there's a lot of truth to that. But a lot of people, when they hear that grace is free, they think it doesn't ask or require anything from them in return. I mean, when you hear the word free, what does it mean? No cost, right? You know, if somebody's giving away something free, that means it doesn't cost you anything. Somebody else has paid for it, not you or me. About 6-7 years ago, Kathy and I got free tickets to the Tampa Bay Rays and Boston Red Sox. Now, these tickets were wonderfully free because they were two rows behind the Rays dugout. How many of you have sat that close? I mean, man, you could see the players walk right into the dugout. You could say, hey, hi, you know, about like from Kathy and I to here. The Rays were walking. And these tickets were free. And if I had to pay for them, they're probably like $80 a piece, probably more than that now. This has been about 6 years ago. I noticed the Rays have raised their ticket prices. But we got to go there free. And you say, well, how'd you get those free tickets, such cool free tickets? Well, I had a guy in my church that worked at Stetson Law School in St. Petersburg, and Stetson Law School had 4 tickets, and for some reason, nobody wanted to use 2 of the tickets. Matter of fact, they were all 4. Well, I think we had all 4 of them. Nobody else wanted to go. So Kathy and I went, and we had free tickets, paid for by Stetson University Law School. And you know what? I didn't have to go back and bow down and thank them, and what can we do for you for these free tickets? They were just flat free. I don't think the law school even knew we were sitting in the seats. One time I got a free first-class upgrade on a plane. And I was very thankful because I was going from California to Atlanta, Georgia. And that's a long haul on an airplane. And when I got a free upgrade, I was thrilled to death. But you know what? I didn't have to pick up dishes. I didn't have to clean the plane afterwards. It was just free. Free grace is understood by some as we receive a free reservation in heaven, paid for us by Jesus on the cross, at no cost to us. Our sins, all of them, our past sins, our present sins, and our future sins are all freely given, forgiven by Christ. And the good part of that free ticket is that nothing or very little is expected of us in return. Now, this is the way some people understand free grace. I call it cheap grace. That's free grace. We go to church on Sunday. You know, we've been saved. Jesus has done what he's done for us. We go to church on Sunday. We drop a few bucks in the offering plate. We try to live the best we can, and that's free grace. When something is free, it's all about me. Doesn't that rhyme? No obligation. Many years ago, back when I was in seminary, I went to a church growth conference. And I remember the speaker. I mean, I will never forget the speaker standing up and saying this to all the pastors and preachers that went to this conference. He was giving us, I guess what the guy understood is good advice. He says, listen, people carve out an hour out of their busy schedule on Sunday to attend church. And you better make sure that when they come to church, you make it worth their while. Because they have carved out an hour and they have sacrificed their time. And the more I think about that, the more I think that's what free grace is, right? We considered a sacrifice to carve out an hour out of our schedule every Sunday to attend worship, to worship the Lord. And if we do make that sacrifice, that preacher better make sure it's worth our while. Because if it's boring and unexciting, then we've wasted our time. Now, if that's how we understand Christianity, that's how we understand worship, how many think we've got a problem? I'm going to tell you, that's not the context in the New Testament when it comes to understanding grace. That's not how those people understood grace at all. Those who heard the gospel did not see grace as it's all about me. They didn't see it as free, and nothing is expected in return. Yes, grace is free in a sense that God was not forced to provide it for us, okay? He wasn't coerced. Nobody twisted God's arm and made him give us free grace. It was a choice that he gave to those people like us who don't deserve it. God freely made a decision, I'm going to give them grace. Oh no, they don't deserve it, but I'm going to give it to them anyway. It's my choice. And it does not mean, and this is the ancient perspective, it does not mean that an appropriate response is not expected, okay? We'll get into this right a little bit more. Grace in the ancient world of Jesus was not a one-way transaction. Being given something of value meant that returning something of value back was expected. Did you get that? You might be thinking, you sound like we have to pay God back or earn our salvation by doing good works or something like that. But that's not what I'm saying, not at all. We could never pay God back, right? You know, God has forgiven an unpayable debt. We can't pay it back. We've committed a crime in which no money can pay off what has happened. We could never do enough good deeds to earn our way to heaven. But that does not mean that we don't need to respond appropriately to the grace that God has freely given us. Now, that's how ancient people understood the gospel. People in the first century. People who these letters were written to. The author of the New Testament, the authors, this is how they understood grace. So let's look at the environment of ancient Rome and ancient Greece and Jewish culture during the time of Jesus, the socio-economic environment in which the gospel came out of. Part of the social fabric that held the society together was called patronage. Patronage means that you have a patron who is a person who supports someone and helps someone with money or gifts or efforts or endorsements, whatever it is people need. It was a world of people helping other people. That was the ethic of their time. Whether they were rich in society or the poorest in society, the culture was you helped other people get ahead. Some sort of patronage took place. Rich people helped whoever they chose to help. Social equals helped each other get ahead. Poor people helped other poor people. It's how they enabled each other to climb the economic and social ladders of their society. They enabled each other to get ahead. It was a world of not what you know, but who you know, okay? You had to have the right connections. It was not so much a world of pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps or rugged individualism like we experience here in America. Instead, it was a culture of people voluntarily helping others better themselves. So we would help each other. You know, Dino would help me, I'd help him. That's just the way the world operated. Yeah, here you go. There you go, brother. The better connections you had, the greater the opportunities. People sought out the best patrons they could. You needed help. I mean, it was not, you reached out to people. They reached out to you. That's just the way the world operated. A patron might be asked to provide money. They might be asked to provide food. They might be asked to provide opportunities to connect us with the right people. Finding a quality patron could open all kinds of doors for you, all kinds of opportunities for you to succeed in life. So patronage was very important. It was part of the social fabric. It knit people's lives together. The next important link in this system of social economic custom was that whoever received benefits from a patron had the responsibility to show gratitude. So if somebody helped you out and they gave you some money, they gave you an opportunity, they helped you get a good job, they let you use their land to raise crops so you could sell them and make a profit, whoever gave you an opportunity, your response was gratitude. You were thankful. And one of the ways you showed your gratitude was you went around telling other people. You went around witnessing, telling other people about how great your patron was. Look what this guy did for me. Look what this person did. You know, I didn't deserve it, but look what they have given me. Telling everybody you could about the kindness and the generosity and the goodness and the lavishness of your benefactor was one of the ways you showed gratitude. Also, gratitude was shown in other ways, by being loyal to your patron. If your patron helped you and helped you succeed in life, and you were loyal to that patron, and even if you ran the risk of losing property or your reputation, you stayed loyal to your patron. That was part of the social fabric. This is the way people lived. Another way that you showed gratitude to your patron was you trusted him. You had faith. A person trusted their patron to provide what the patron said he would provide. There was no doubt. You had confidence that the person who was your patron would stand behind his word by action. Another response of gratitude was service. Not in the sense of paying somebody back, but serving with gladness to express the gratitude and the benefits that your patron has given to you. Service meant helping other people. You were expected to pass on the benefits that you received to someone else. You know, that's why, remember the story in Matthew chapter 18 when it came to forgiveness, where one guy was forgiven a huge debt by his patron? Remember, he owed this guy like, I don't know, $20 million, some astronomical number, and his patron says, okay, I'm dropping the debt. And what did this non-gracious recipient do? He went to the next guy that owed him $50. And did he pass it on? No, he was a patron that didn't show gratitude. He grabbed the guy by the neck and said, you better pay me or else. Well, see, that was a terrible, terrible sin in ancient culture, is not to pass on the patronage that you've just received. In this culture, failure to show gratitude was a disgrace. It was an ethical sin. It was an insult to your patron. If you wanted to have a bad credit rating in the ancient world, you know how you got a bad credit rating? Not by not paying your bills, but by not showing gratitude to the patron who had been so generous to you. If you wanted a bad reputation, you know, that if you were a person that didn't show gratitude, then you would probably get passed over by all the other patrons. They weren't going to take a risk. See, to break the circle by giving to someone who was ungrateful or who potentially wouldn't pass it on, well, that person was considered a risk. And the system worked because the chain was not broken. The benefits bestowed on others from the patron was called grace. Have you ever heard the word grace? You see, the benefits that were given to an individual and then the gratitude that was shown back, both of those things were called grace during the time of Jesus. That's how the ancient world understood grace. Grace was the giving back of the appropriate response. Now you might be wondering, why did I take this time to give you such a lesson on the practice of ancient patronage? You know, that's a lot of information. Well, because that was the culture the New Testament was written in. Remember original intent. When the people who lived during the time these books were written read and taught the gospel, when they heard the gospel, they heard it in an environment of what I just explained to you. They understood that the gift of grace, coming from Jesus, coming from God through his Son, Jesus, was freely given, and the appropriate response was gratitude and loyalty and respect and service. Jesus is our patron, and to him we should show gratitude. You can see this in Paul's words here in 2 Corinthians chapter 15 verses, or chapter 5 verses 14 through 15. Let me read it again. It says, "For the love of Christ urges us on, because we are convinced that one has died for all. Therefore, all have died. And he died for all, so that those who live might no longer live for themselves, but for him who died and was raised for them." When you read those words, you can see that Paul has a sense of gratitude. You can see the loyalty, you can see the respect in those words to the benefactor, Jesus. Paul says, so that those who live might live no longer for themselves, but for him who died for them. Paul also says the love of Christ urges us on. He says it's our desire to carry through with what we've been given to make sure that others can partake in this. For those who heard the gospel message and received the grace given to them by Jesus, they understood clearly the appropriate response to the gospel. Gratitude, loyalty to Christ, respect for the Lord, service, and trust. And as we stop and think about our own Christian lives, do we respond appropriately to the grace given to us? Do we show gratitude for what Christ has done for us? With loyalty, with service, with trust? Do you treasure it? Do you tell others? Do you make known that what Christ has done for you? Are you loyal? Do you serve him? Do you pass on generously the benefits that Christ has bestowed upon you? Are you a generous giver? Do you help others better their lives? Are you a distribution channel that God can use to show his love? I guess one of the best ways most of us here in the 21st century can relate to this. How many of you ever seen the movie Pay It Forward? You ever seen that movie? I think it's pretty old, maybe at least 10 years old, maybe older than that. Somebody just does a random act of kindness and says a word or does something that bless somebody else. And he says, now you go and you do the same today for somebody else. And so somebody else does. Next thing you know, it begins to catch on, and you've got a whole city full of nice people, right? doing nice things for other people. Well, that's kind of the idea that we're talking about here. You see, that's how you show gratitude to someone who does something for you, is you turn around and you go and do something for somebody else. And you give generously just like you were given to. That's kind of a practical way that we can do that. So remember, when the original readers or hearers of the gospel received grace and they heard the message, they knew what the appropriate response was. They knew that they were to be gracious. They knew that they were to show gratitude. And I guess the question we have, do we do that in the 21st century church? Or do we just take and do we just receive? Or do we pass it on? And do we trust the Lord? And do we serve the Lord? In our world today, one of the things Jesus told us to do in response to the gospel was to always remember what he has done. And that's why we do communion service. People ask me, what's the point of communion? I've been asked that probably 100 times over the years. Why do we do this every month? Well, it's a time of remembering Jesus. It's a time of thanksgiving to Jesus. In the book of worship, which we're not using here today, but we always have what's called a prayer of confession, where we confess to the Lord our shortcomings. And a big bulk of that ancient prayer that was written hundreds of years ago is to ask the Lord to forgive us for our neglect of remembering what he has done for us. Because we do that on a regular basis. So as we celebrate the Lord's table this morning, if you were to look in the hymnal, we won't do that